The 2026 International Colloquium Series Europe is sponsored by the Episcopal Diocese of California, the Tabernacle Community Development Corporation, the Waters Living Trust, and Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. With university sponsors, Pepperdine University, the University of Geneva, the Graduate Theological Union, the Catholic University of Leuven, and the Catholic University of Lyon. And community partners, the Cathedral Church of the Holy Trinity, the American Cathedral in Paris, the Chemin Neuf Community in France, Emmanuel Episcopal Church of Geneva, the Center for Liberation Theologies at the Catholic University of Leuven, and the French-speaking Institute of Systematic Theology and Ethics at the University of Geneva. With the 2026 hotel partner, Nest M Gallery, Paris La Défense, an Accor luxury hotel. And special thanks to the following: Dr. Christophe Chalamet, Dr. Estelle Sogbu, Dr. Judith Gruber, Dr. Dara Straub, Kim Powell, Dr. Anne-Marie Reinen, Dr. Raymond Carr, Dr. Valerie Miles-Tribble, and Colette Rogers-Grizzell.
The Northern California Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Foundation is dedicated to promoting justice, health, education, and service. Please consider making a donation at NorcalMLKFoundation.org. Every donation makes a difference.
Who died recently, who was with Miles Davis, a percussionist in the 80s. Guitar players, Terris Grizzell, or nowadays Jacob Brook. Bass player, Niels Henning Hosted Pedersen, NHOP. Or nowadays, the extraordinary Anders Jormin, with whom Uwe performs regularly. Or in Poland, where you have several generations of musicians who have met and who became the Tomasz Stanko Quartet, creating gorgeous, poetic music of the highest caliber. I could go on, talking about Greece, the Middle East, South Africa, of course, Central Africa, India, Japan, but I think you get the point. And Uwe Steinmetz will say more on this later, on this expanse of jazz music throughout the globe. So thank you to Aaron Grizzell for reaching out 3 months ago and proposing to come to Geneva with this fantastic delegation, whom I will be introducing throughout the afternoon, as I've come to call it the delegation. That's who you are. And we quickly decided, Aaron and I, that this event would center on theology and jazz, broadly conceived. So the US delegation, just to mention their names, I'll say more about each one of them later this afternoon. Valerie Miles-Tribble is here. Aaron Grizzell is here. Raymond Carr is here in the first row. And Colette Rogers-Grizzell, unfortunately, is not here. She's in Paris, recovering from a little illness. And then we have Uwe Steinmetz from Germany, and then 2 guests from Switzerland who at least live in Switzerland. There's Kaylin, who is in the back here, Kaylin Gale, who's a flutist. And there's Andy Fuhrer, who will join us later. We are grateful for your presence today and tomorrow. We want to rejoice in your presence. We want to show support to you and affirm your work in Northern California and elsewhere in the USA, in a very difficult political context, which affects us all, but which undoubtedly affects you and people who live day to day in the US much more directly and sometimes and often painfully. And so I wanted to end these very brief introductory remarks by expressing our gratitude and also a word of solidarity in the face of current and future challenges. And thank you to Uwe Steinmetz, who immediately shifted something in his calendar so that he could come to Geneva today. Thank you to Kaylin, thank you to Andy Fuhrer, and you will hear them tonight at the Jazz Vespers if you're able to attend. And I think that's it for me for now for these little introductory remarks, and I turn to you, Aaron, for your introductory remarks, if you have any, or then the talk. You saw in the program, Aaron will speak on the historical meaning-making, impact of the spirituals, the blues, and jazz on the movement of civil and human rights in the US and the world. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Christophe, and for this very gracious introduction, but for our budding relationship that I'm very grateful for. When we first spoke by some virtual video thing, I don't know whether it was Skype or Zoom or one of those, we immediately connected, and it was one of those connections for that, you know, you might have a friend who you get into a conversation with and you just don't want to hang up kind of thing, because there's always something that's alive and enlivening conversation. And that's how it was with Christophe and myself. It just so happened that it was 2 a.m. or something in my house, so I had to go to bed. But it was that type of relationship that was very helpful for me, and I'm just grateful that Christophe was willing to open a discussion and channel for us to think about this particular subject. A bit about me. I serve as the executive director of the Northern California Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Foundation. That foundation was started by Dr. King's wife, the late Coretta Scott King, on November 2nd, 1983. Veto-proof legislation passed through the Congress of the United States, marking the third Monday in January of every year as the national holiday in honor of Dr. King. Coretta Scott King pushed through that legislation nearly by herself. She had learned the traits of becoming a federal lobbyist. She created these relationships with members of both chambers of Congress, both political parties, to shepherd through this legislation in honor of her husband. I don't know all of the machinations that she had to go through to get that legislation pushed through, but she successfully did it. She then spent the next 2 years going around the United States founding organizations to help organize the celebration of the holiday that was to come into effect the third Monday in January 1986. So they established by federal law, and they gave a 2-year window to begin the holiday. So she went around the country, and so she came to San Francisco and started the organization that I am honored to serve in. And it was Coretta Scott King. We think of Dr. King as this prodigious figure, which he certainly was. His social justice, his public ministry lasted 13 years, from 1955 to 1968. He did not have the type of time to create institutions that would continue the movement due to his untimely demise. It was Coretta Scott King who did all of that. Coretta Scott King created the King Center. Coretta Scott King was the spokesperson who had to replace Dr. King in speeches that he was scheduled to make in 1968. For instance, he was scheduled to do the commencement address at Harvard University. She did that. She did all of the public facing things while she put together these institutions to help us to think about the meaning of beloved community, enacting what justice means, enacting what love means in the context of civil and human rights. So she is a major figure, along with helping Dr. King think through strategy during the civil rights movement. She was his closest confidant, right? So those types of things are very central in how we now, as a foundation, think about what beloved community means, what justice means, what love means in the context of the work of Coretta Scott King and the work that she did after Dr. King died, and the work of Martin Luther King. And they are important in the context of what I will be talking about today. I'm a historian of religions. That's where I've got my PhD and all of that. And so I am not a theologian. Dr. Miles-Tribble and Dr. Carr are great at that. I'm a historian. And so the way that I think about these things is through the lens of a theoretical framework of the past and how it informed their present work. And so what I'll be talking about when we talk about the impact of the spirituals and the blues and jazz on the movement of civil rights, I want to give a small context of where Dr. King and Dr. King came from in order to be able to think about these things. So I want to talk, and I want to not talk about his parents. I want to talk about something further back that was embedded, not just in Dr. King, but embedded in the movement and in the African American, in the Atlantic world, that was embedded in all of us, in my forebears, Dr. King's forebears, how that came to be a formation of the meaning of justice, the meaning of love, the meaning of beloved community, okay? And then talk about how the spirituals, the blues, and jazz emerged out of this cauldron of pain and struggle and, often terror and horror. But what came out of that was not a revenge or a vengeance. What came out of that is a way in which people, as a human family, can come together and exist as a better human family, right? I don't know if anyone has heard here, one of Dr. King's mentors, Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman, I see Howard Thurman I actually attend Howard Thurman's church, the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples in San Francisco. It was the first intentionally interracial congregation in the United States of America. Eleanor Roosevelt was one of the first members. Josephine Baker was one of the first members. You had these, during the founding of the United Nations, you had all of these people come in to want to be a part of something that was not seen in the United States, and that was Black people and white people worshiping together on Sunday morning. And that's what he did. It was a very, it was a trial, and it was successful, because 83 years later, I'm a happy member of that congregation. So it worked, and it did something for the nation. But Howard Thurman thought about these points that Dr. King kept with him. In his book, Jesus and the Disinherited, the question was, what do you do when your back is against the wall? When you have lost, when you have experienced loss, when you have experienced pain, when you have experienced struggle to the point of exhaustion, what happens to people when their backs are against the wall? And so Howard Thurman thought about the human context in a way that promoted a better human family. And I mean it this way. He believed that human beings can survive by being mean and derisive and angry and mad at each other, and human beings can survive. Personally, I'm a living witness. My forebears came forcibly, the balance of them, to the United States in the 18th century. Enslaved for years, 2 centuries, right? Jim Crow laws and the like, beaten, some of them murdered, some of them people that I know. My dad was forced into a segregated school. My dad, who's still living, you can touch him, kind of thing. But yet, I'm still here, I exist, right? So we can survive as human beings who have not treated each other well. But Thurman's question was, what would happen when we do treat others well? Can we advance the human family better when we nourish each other with love and with understanding? That was one of the things that stuck with Dr. King. What happens when we do what is right? Dr. King's quote, "The time is always right to do right." And it has something to do with a larger idea of advancing human community. He believed in the spark of the divine that existed in every person, his philosophy of personalism. Personalism was something that was a philosophy that he was able to accept in a way at Boston University, because as a child, that's how his family and the community in which he grew up in, that's how they operated practically every day. And so what personalism, that philosophy, gave him is it gave him a language with which to speak about it in the public square, because it was something that that was already instilled in him. So as his education grew, he found this philosophy that could work for him, and he could think about in building a new framework for this idea of beloved community. But all of this came through the prism of the Atlantic world. The prism of the Atlantic world. Through the capture and enslavement of African people who were forced to come here in America with no name, Their names were taken. They were taken from their homes, taken from their lands, taken from their community. All of the things that gave definition to a person were stripped away. In fact, in Nigeria, there is a on one of the islands that staged these places, they had this thing called an attenuation well. These attenuation wells, the slave would stand there, they would grab water out of the attenuation well, and they would force the captive to drink the water. And the message in the drinking of the water was that when you drink this water, everything that you recalled and knew from this point is now done away with. The old has passed away, and now everything from then on, you are a new person and becomes new. And that new person is designed to be a slave at the hands of a master. There's a biblical verse that has a different context to it, but it's eerie. The old has passed away, and now all has become new. It's the same idea, but this newness for the African captive was to be in the hands of a new master in order to till land, in order to domesticate the land, grow crops and raw materials in order to feed the appetites of a European, growing European nation. It was modernity that was building itself up at that time. And these are the things that and places that Dr. King and his family and his wife came from. We came from this sort of, but within that space was developed a way to survive. And the idea of survival had to do with the concrete way in which human beings can actually live in an oppressive, terrorizing environment. And it was calculated. If I treat you well and you treat me well, we can survive, right? If I don't treat you well and if I go behind your back and cause you problems, I'm going to have problems. Very simple stuff, you know? And there was this ethic of cooperation. There was this ethic of family and community in order to survive, and to survive in a very harsh environment. So that as things began to move forward, not only did survival happen, but the push toward justice, even during the enslaved period, the push toward justice happened. All of these things occurred at the time when Dr. King's forebears were making their way in Alabama and in Georgia. So by the time Dr. King was born, and his dad, who was a minister, his mother, who was whose own father was the minister of Ebenezer Church, actually founded Ebenezer Church, his grandfather. Before them, they had this ethic of community that was built through a life of difficulty and oppression, right? So that Dr. King could talk about his family in a way that wouldn't seem possible in an America that did not recognize the life of Black people. This was 1940s, 1950s. They didn't recognize that life, but he could say, he could speak about the love that his family had that strengthened his ability to become a whole human being. And so when we talk about music and we talk about the place that music, the location of music in the life of the civil rights movement and in the life of the Black community in the United States. I'm saying it that way for a reason. The Black community in the United States, that music comes built in with this idea of community, with this idea of love, with this idea of hope. The sacred spirituals were birthed that way, with this idea of hope, with this idea of community, with this idea of justice. So first comes these spirituals, this idea of an idea of justice that is subversive. So you would see a song, many of you may have heard of a song called "Swing Down Chariot and Let Me Ride," right? That song is a spiritual that we have, but that song wasn't about a chariot coming down from heaven and us getting on it and riding up to a better land. That was about escape. That was about a message of escaping from slavery and getting to freedom land. Typically it was the northern states or Canada, places like that. These types of songs and these spirituals created a message. There was a messaging system. They were coded systems. 'Tis the old ship of Zion. 'Tis the old ship, get on board. This was about escape toward freedom. These spirituals were inspiring, but they were about the practical lived possibility in enslaved conditions, right? So the spirituals were and work songs were very helpful because they helped people to survive. Second, out of that, as the Emancipation Proclamation was signed and Reconstruction came in, this Reconstruction era was an era of sheer possibility that was foreclosed on in the late 1870s and began to actually lose itself by the middle 1880s. But what was also birthed out of that was the blues and the vestiges and the beginnings of the jazz era. These were genres that were created by free people to build a bulwark of encouragement at a time when encouragement didn't exist, because the creation of the Ku Klux Klan, the citizens committees, and the like were created that then birthed the Jim Crow era in the United States. But these resistance pieces, even in the blues, when it's very discouraging and very these lyrics may seem discouraging, there's always a tinge of hope and a tinge of possibility. Jazz in its structure going in was almost like a breakout of joy in the midst of sorrow. Louis Armstrong and the Hot Five in the early 20s and late teens, that was just you know what I mean? In the midst of pain. And these were resistance mechanisms, one, for survival. Two, they were mechanisms for the messaging of justice. Because the artistry that was given or that was created enabled a type of messaging that you just couldn't do safely in the public square. But music gave the possibility of that. And so from those early years through to Jim Crow, John Coltrane's Love Supreme, all of these frameworks were a mechanism for resistance and a mechanism for strengthening resolve in the face of oppression. And that's a lot of what Dr. King used. He needed that in order to help build the movement, particularly with young people. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference that was created, that Dr. King created with the group of ministers, they had this thing called Operation Breadbasket, right? That was an operation to do some of the practical needs, fulfill some of the practical needs of the community. And the Operation Breadbasket had a choir and a band, an orchestra, he called it. And they had a band leader. 2 hours before Dr. King was assassinated, he called his band leader and said, I want you to play Take My Hand, Precious Lord by Thomas A. Dorsey, but I want you to play it pretty. Now, I don't know what that means. I want you to play it nice. This is from Dr. King, right? He walks out on the balcony, he's shot, goes to the hospital, and he dies. The rally continues that night, and this orchestra, whose conductor was a jazz saxophonist, plays this song in honor of Dr. King. Music and jazz was central to Dr. King's framework for bringing in and building community, right? He enjoyed sacred songs, sacred music. He came from a Christian home, Christian family who sang spirituals and gospels all the time. But this jazz thing was something for King because it had a different message coded into it. It was a message of resistance as well as a message of possibility. Blues played a slightly different framework. It was a message tinged with pain, but always bringing in this framework of hope. Hope as an action, not just as a wish. That's not what hope was in Dr. King's framework. Hope was an active, it was an action word that you have to proceed from hope to hope. Because once one hope is fulfilled, there's more to go. It's always moving forward. So you have to continue in hope. Faith is the substance. This is Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, of things we work for. My faith is, for Dr. King, my faith is a visible sign of the things that I am working toward. That's what hope is. It's not there yet. And I'm not just believing it's there yet, I am working toward the attainment and the satisfaction and the possibility of grasping what is out there. And that's what hope is. And that's what he used during the civil rights movement. That was the thing that gravitated people toward Dr. King. He was a good speaker. In the Black American framework, he was not the best, but he was good. Little funny story on Coretta Scott King. Coretta Scott King was in Boston, and she was in musical school, I believe it was Berkeley. She was trained to be a singer. And so her friend said, you got to meet this guy. You know, he might be somebody, you know, you want to. So she met him. They went on a date. When she met him, went on a date, her friend asked her, well, what did you think? And the first thing she said was, he's short. You know, I figured, you know, I'm looking for someone who's tall. He's short. The second thing she said is that he's not very cosmopolitan. You know, he's not he comes from the South. They aren't too with it. I've been in the North for a long time, and I like, you know, more progressive style. You know, I need a more cosmopolitan type, somebody who would be from Geneva, Switzerland, not from the backwoods of, you know, that's just a little slower than what I would want. But Dr. King grew on her. She was the progressive one, that kind of thing. And so, so the idea of Dr. King as a person, he was a regular guy who was not prepared to take the leadership of a movement. They wanted him to take the lead in the movement because, one, he had a PhD, Montgomery bus boycott. He had a PhD and was, I think, the only minister, black or white, who had a earned PhD in the South, in the pulpit. And they wanted him because he was a new minister and he had the energy to do it. He didn't want to do it. It was Coretta King who said, you have to do it. And so he began, and one of the things that he relied on was the music in the movement. He relied on for his own sacred well-being, the Gospels and the spirituals. Take my hand, precious Lord. But he relied on jazz and he relied on the understanding and meaning of the blues to help bring the masses together. And it was very important for him to create this swell of, because jazz was far out ahead of the movement itself. Jazz music talked about where the civil rights movement should be going years before the civil rights movement got there. I mean, it was much, and you know, the arts is like that. The arts are much more progressive to get us, and that's what jazz was. That's what jazz was for him. And the blues brought in this idea of the pain and pathos with hope built in, always with the tinge of hope. Jazz was possibility. Jazz was interpreting the movement and pushing things forward. And so when it goes across the globe, we could, that could be sensed in places where we could hear better, I should say. Jazz could really find a footing. And Uwe, I'm sure, knows this through his work. Jazz finds a footing around because the message is the same. It is love. It is hope. It is an ethical grounding that people can, the human condition works better when we come together. When we treat each other as fully human and with a spark of the divine in us. I'm going to stop there, and I am happy to take questions and thoughts from you, and to love to answer any questions you may have.
Questions, comments for Aaron Grizzell? Just want to mention that Serge Mola is here, who has been translating Howard Thurman's book that you mentioned. Yes, right here. So
I'd love to talk. Which one? Jesus and the Disinherited?
Yes. Right. So it's planned for publication in Geneva by the end of the year.
So it'd be great to talk. Well, you know this already, I'm sure. I look forward to talking to you.
And that's not the first work he's doing in relation to theology coming from North America and from the community, from the African American, from the Black community. So Serge Mola is here. And then there's Rita, also did an MA thesis on the spirituals.
Oh, good.
Just last fall, right? Last fall.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, and Kaylin in the back did
There's
an
Kaylin.
MA.
I see you asked about Kaylin come in.
So, but there's also other people in the hall. So comments or questions for Aaron Grizzell? Anyone? Saida.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Saida.
Yeah, enjoyed it. So I have a question regarding, because of background of philosophy of history.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned philosophy of personalism, which was the heart of Martin Luther King's dedicated fight for freedom and justice. So my question is, the idea of philosophy of personalism is that every single human being has inherent dignity and freedom, and no human being should be treated as tools or means, which is very Kantian imperative. So these are also at the heart of European and American democracy, equality, dignity, human rights. No human should be treated as means. Coming from the background from the Middle East, I can say like also where the African American history, we see this double standards of some all humans are equal, but some humans are more humans. So this is like, what was then different in his understanding of philosophy of personalism, which is different from the values of like European democracy, American democracy, which is very much shaped by European Enlightenment and Christianity, Christianity's ideals. Because later, I would say that he wanted his fight showed the hypocrisy of European and American democracy, that they are not true to their claims. But some people like Malcolm X and other decolonial and post-colonial thinkers would say, no, American modernity and European modernity is very much shaped in the idea of racism and slavery, and we cannot understand the modernity without it, and modernity would not work without it. So what would be your response?
Thank you for that question. So I think that Dr. King, the idea of Dr. King's thought is birthed in the cauldron of oppression. And so I like your point, because I spoke, I believe it was at the Catholic University of Lyon just this past Thursday about this. Is that, as you said, modernity couldn't exist and get off the ground without an economic engine. And that economic engine first began with this whole triangular trading system and the movement of a labor force to domesticate these new vast tracts of land and all of these raw materials and all of this stuff to go back to Europe to build and to create more modern societies, right? But that couldn't happen if that stuff wasn't done. And they needed a labor commodity to do that. The thing is that commodity were human beings just like they were. So how do we account for that? And I'm talking about Europe, right? The powers that be at that time. How do they account for the humanness question, right? But two, what is not accounted for is those who are enslaved, their own existence within and between themselves. What did they think about themselves? How did they become a community to survive in such oppressive environments? How can Dr. King, who lived in the other America, as he would say, there are two Americas. He lived in the other America that was not recognized, right? How could he say these things about my family raised me with love and dignity and all of this when he was shut out from a whole section of America? Howard Thurman talks about it this way. Howard Thurman said, well, look, when I was coming up, those people were from a whole nother planet. White people were from a whole nother, their world or wherever they're from a whole nother place. That had nothing to do with me. Even though he raked the grass and the leaves off the grass from one of the white families on the other side of town. You know what I mean? But they were from a whole different planet. W.E.B. Du Bois talks about this veil, right? So black people had to live in two worlds, right? But in America, white people didn't have to live in the black world. So they wouldn't know anything about it. And that in and of itself was a part of, central to the meaning of modernity. That was occluded from the vision of those who were oppressing them. So with that, you have this whole idea of modernity that is not known within the space of these dominant people. Black people know it because we lived it, right? And so what made Dr. King his message so resonate was that coming out of this whole other existence comes these principles that are undeniable. How can justice be located inside of a person rather than as this 6th century code of giving every man his due? How can justice be located inside of somebody based on this divine kernel in everyone? It was just a new and compelling message. How can you break a law and be right in breaking that law? Because that's not just. You know what I mean? Just natural. You know, in the sense, that's not just. You're breaking a law. But how can you break a law and it be the right thing? These were oxymorons in the system, but they were built through the modern framework that was occluded purposefully. Because these, again, you all know this, the Constitution of the United States has it built in that those who are enslaved, even though they didn't use the word slavery, were counted as 3/5 of a person. 2 ways: for voting, you're 3/5, and for taxes as a commodity. That's still in the Constitution, right? It's not like they said, not even the 13th, 14th, the 15th Amendment didn't say that you're a whole person. They said that, these people are free and you can, you have these rights. But they never said you're a full person. You know what I mean? So these are things that are central to the idea of what you're getting at. Because I think what you're talking about is precisely what I think how Dr. King thought about it. And I'm always thinking about that question because there's more in there, you know what I mean? There's depths we can mine. But at its space, there is a whole level of life and existence in the modern world that the modern world doesn't know about. But in order for the modern world to exist and be a part of moving forward, they have to know about this world because that's the driver. That's my thought.
Any other question or remark? We have the whole rest of the afternoon, but Serge.
Hi, Serge.
You talked about the double meaning of the spiritual.
Double meaning of
the spirituals.
Yes.
Is there also a double meaning in the blues? Because, for example, when they talk about a woman raped or a woman treated badly by the white men, they are talking about something else also.
Yeah.
Was it a real double meaning or?
Great question, and I know Dr. Miles-Tribble is great at covering this part. So while I was riding a train over here, I was reading 2 songs, and one of them was Billie Holiday's. Thank you. Right? That, similar to what you're talking about, but it's about, that, there is a double meaning, but there is the metaphor is sitting there in plain view. It's sitting right there. And it's not something that can be easily missed because it is painful the way that she talks about it. But she doesn't say, she's using the lynched person as a piece of fruit, right? It's burned, it's charred, and it's strange. Lips contorted, nose, and it's strange. And it's grotesque. And it's something that another human being did to that person. That's what's built into the song or those lyrics. So I think, and Dr. Miles-Tribble may touch this. I think that is, I think the meanings in the blues some of the songs have that sort of coded piece in there. The spirituals were just rife with it because that was messaging. That and the quilts that were made by, mothers, those were maps. Those were, that. So the spirituals were in a similar fashion in terms of providing a code for a way to get from slavery to freedom. The blues could be very harsh. In terms of its vividness, right? Louis Armstrong, I think it was Fats Waller that had a song called, I have it here, Fats Waller, 1929, a song that Louis Armstrong covered, and it had just painful lyrics. And the way Louis Armstrong sang it, he sang it to shame white audiences. But the way that he sung it was so fun, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everyone would just clap and go along, but he was like, shame on you for doing this. He had a way of doing that. Billie Holiday's voice had a way of just, shaming a person in another way. But they couldn't deny the magnetism of it and the reaction of it. So there are a couple of ways to look at it. Thank you, everybody.
I suggest we take a 5-10 minute break. There's some beverages in the fridge over there, which I will bring to the table over there. If Uwe feels like it, we could summon everybody back with a few notes, but we'll see if we want to do that or not. Because there's a beautiful piano here that was tuned last week, which we might want to use. That's also why it was placed here earlier. It was in the back there. So 5-10 minute break. When you hear some notes, you're invited to come back to your seat. And we'll hear Valerie Miles-Tribble next. Or Raymond will, okay.
Ray, do you
So
want him to go next? No? Okay.
you might as well go next. If you're, yeah, it's projected. So can move around
he's
and
raised
and
some prize.
thank again Aaron for.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
The International Colloquium Series, confronting global issues with moral clarity and intellectual depth.